today on the Frontline Health Podcast.
So your gut, which we're learning more and more about, is, as a lot of people call now, the second brain because it affects so many things across our body. And we know that if you're having some of these issues, these 9 things that we just mentioned, then that's a sign that you really need to start figuring out ways to regulate it and recognize it early. Because if you miss it or it becomes I guess, further down the road, then it becomes a much harder proposition to overcome that piece because you really need that whole person approach to get you to where you can get over something like that. And just working on total changes to your lifestyle as opposed to picking on certain symptoms and getting medications for those symptoms, but really go to the root cause of what's causing your nervous system to kind of be stuck in that fight or flight.
Well, hello and welcome back to another episode of the Frontline Health Podcast by Centurion Health, where we share health news, tips, and insights to help you take ownership of your health. My name is Evan Patrick. As always, I'm joined by Troy Duell, founder and CEO of Centurion Health. And today we're bringing you another round of the latest health headlines from the past month. A lot of interesting topics centered around gut health, ADHD, how sleep affects our overall health, and many more really interesting articles that we found this past month.
Yeah, there's a lot out there and excited to dive into it. So why don't we get started with the very first one, which was how a bad night's sleep affects the brain's cleaning system. The subtitle says a lack of sleep doesn't just make you tired, it changes how your brain works while you're awake. So, what they go on to talk about is that sleep deprivation actually disrupts the brain's cleaning system and it causes waves of cerebrospinal fluid to kind of intrude during waking hours and it temporarily impairs your attention. I think we've all been there when we haven't had good sleep and all of a sudden we just get kind of stuck and we get a daze that goes on and we just kind of blank out. That's what they're saying is happening when you have poor sleep. The study actually found that attention lapses in sleep deprived individuals were linked to coordinated changes in brain activity, fluid flow of the cerebrospinal fluid, and body signals like pupil size, which suggest that a shared system regulating alertness, fluid movement, and arousal was key into causing those blank out times. So kind of interesting to get into that, something that I think we've all experienced and we've wondered why things like that may happen. But just seeing that when you don't get the right sleep, cerebrospinal fluid seems to be the technical thing that's going on. It gets released and your brain isn't able to clear kind of those waste proteins that happen in the body and causes us to just blank out and have poor cognitive performance and ultimately giving us better long-term brain health if we're getting the rest that we need.
Yeah, the crazy thing, anytime we start talking about how sleep impacts your health, is how this is really like one of the simplest things we can do that is, for the most part, I mean, I know people have different circumstances, but for the most part, within our control, how much sleep we get, and we can always do things to improve our sleep quality, like blackout curtains, eating earlier, that kind of thing. But that our environments really are designed to stack the deck against us when it comes to getting good sleep and getting enough sleep. I mean, for me, a big thing is if I get on my phone at night after dinner at all, and you start scrolling and it's so addicting, and then before you know it, you have lost an hour that you didn't intend to lose, and then you're behind on everything else and you don't get as much sleep as you need. You've had that blue light exposure at night, which also is impacting your sleep. And so, like, I really think this is something that more people need to prioritize, especially, understanding the specific mechanisms for how it is impacting our health, I think is important, but also just understanding how, like, our environment really is stacked against us when it comes to getting good sleep.
Absolutely. And I think you hit the nail on the head with the phone. The phone, TV, whatever it is, I think that's probably the biggest culprit across our culture as to why people are getting poor sleep because that blue light exposure, getting a little bit extra work on your computer, whatever it may be, those things have the greatest impact. You can do the little things like get the blackout curtains, make sure that you are in a cool environment, that you're going to bed on time. But even if you do all those things and you're still on your phone, uh, an hour prior to going to bed, then there is a chance that your sleep is going to get affected. So definitely making wiser choices with that, which is easier said than done. I understand.
Yeah, and before we move on to this next study, just real quick, I want to recommend a book that really changed my perspective on sleep. It's called Why We Sleep. And basically, they go into all of the different aspects of our health that are impacted. And one of the most surprising things is they talk about how when we do daylight savings time and we lose an hour of sleep, there is actually an increase in the number of cardiac related health events that happen within the next week. And that is just like, that's insane how, I mean, and obviously these are people who have, they're predisposed, they have other things going on that are priming them for having cardiac episodes, but just losing that sleep on a large scale impacts our health in so many ways. But fantastic book when it comes to just understanding how important sleep is for our overall health.
Great recommendation.
Our next headline, How Mold Exposure May Harm the Brain, Gut, and Immune System. Traditional Chinese medicine focuses on supporting the body's immune defenses and natural detoxification processes, helping the body better manage mold toxins. So studies suggest that mycotoxins can cross the blood-brain barrier, disrupt gut microbiota, trigger neuroinflammation, and overstimulate immune responses, potentially influencing conditions like cognitive decline, autism-related mechanisms, asthma, and inflammatory bowel disease. Vulnerable groups include children, older adults, and people with weakened immune systems. So some of the recommendations are reducing exposure through proper food handling, home moisture control, and mold removal is critical, alongside supporting the body's detoxification systems. Dietary changes, gut support, and traditional approaches such as TCM-based detox methods may help mitigate health effects, though prevention remains the most important strategy. Troy, what's kind of your reaction to this headline when we talk about mold exposure, environmental toxins harming our brain, gut, and immune systems, three very, very important organs and systems in our body?
Yeah, I think we don't take mold as seriously as we probably should as a culture. And I don't know why that is. Part of it is maybe it's a financial thing. If we find mold, we're just going to try to clean it up as best we can and not do anything about it. But I'm reminded if you read the Old Testament, they talk about if you find black mold in a building, they tell them to burn it and to throw all the rocks into a pile of rubble and move
Mhm.
out and don't ever come back. And then they have to rebuild. That's how seriously it was taken back in that time. So clearly, there has been a historical precedent that mold has been an issue for people's health. And now I think with kind of the advancement of where we are with science, we're able to see what mold actually does and has from a standpoint of health effects on an individual. And I think it just is something that we need to wake up to and pay attention to. You know, again, not something to lose sleep over because we know if you lose sleep, you have other issues, but you want to make sure that you're being cognizant of it and make sure that you're not allowing a scenario or scene where mold begins to grow in your house or you're taking in moldy food because it has a huge effect on our bodies.
Quick story on that. I have a friend who is in the Navy, and Navy barracks are notorious for being very, very moldy. Obviously, close to the water, that kind of thing. And so warm environments where mold is primed to grow. He actually was discharged from the Navy because of health related issues that were going on in his life. And he was put on full disability by the VA because the VA doctors, through a lot of investigation, were able to connect the mold exposure that he experienced while he was in training in these Navy barracks to fibromyalgia that actually was activated in his body. And he started experiencing a lot of chronic pain and still wakes up in a lot of pain every single day because of this mold exposure, which that's really crazy to me that being exposed to mold can actually cause that if you have some type of predisposition to that.
Yeah, I mean, and what's really crazy to me is one person could be in the same place and not be affected at all, but somebody else who maybe has a compromised liver or they've got a predisposition to it, like you mentioned, they can come out and it truly affect their health in ways that none of us can imagine. And even those who are not predisposed to some of those bigger things, like we talked about, that debilitating scenario, we know that mold can cause brain fog. It can cause uh, joint pain and make you not as comfortable or not as good as you would be. So there's a reason that even if you don't feel like you're predisposed or have issues with it, there's a reason you should really work hard to get mold out of your life and out of your system so your body can really work on other things when it comes in contact with it, whether that's viral infections or bacterial infections. Yeah, so our next headline is nine signs your nervous system is stuck in fight or flight. Uh, the subheadline is tuning into bodily cues can be useful for recognizing when unprocessed emotions are threatening health. And really, what it kind of goes into is it outlines nine warning signs, including poor sleep, chronic pain, digestive issues, obsessive behaviors, circulation problems, and severe menopause symptoms that signal that the nervous system is kind of out of whack. And it's not a necessarily isolated condition, but that it's a sign of your whole nervous system. And they found that a lot of these symptoms are linked to the gut, brain, and stress response system. So your gut, which we're learning more and more about, is, as a lot of people call now, the second brain because it affects so many things across our body. And we know that if you're having some of these issues, these nine things that we just mentioned, then that's a sign that you really need to start figuring out ways to regulate it and recognize it early. Because if you miss it or it becomes, I guess, further down the road, then it becomes a much harder proposition to overcome that piece because you really need that whole person approach to get you to where you can get over something like that. And just working on total changes to your lifestyle as opposed to picking on certain symptoms and getting medications for those symptoms, but really go to the root cause of what's causing those your nervous system to kind of be stuck in that fight or flight.
Yeah, that really is fascinating how much of a memory your nervous system has. I listened to Dr. John Deloney. I don't know if you're familiar, but he's with the Dave Ramsey people. He's a psychologist, and he talks a lot about how people who have unprocessed trauma their nervous systems might still be in fight or flight, and it's affecting their relationships that they have around them because their nervous system has a memory even of like specific memories that they're not conscious of
Yeah.
in their brains. So it really is fascinating how, like you said, your mental health affects your physical health. And really, as believers, we know that so much of this comes down to our spiritual health. And are
Mm.
we learning to trust in God? Are we learning to have peace in God, and in doing so, actually experience physical changes in our body as our nervous systems are regulated by being at peace.
So true. So true.
Our next headline: one in four non-antibiotic drugs linked to disrupted gut health. Common medications make it easier for harmful bacteria to take hold, especially in older or vulnerable patients. A study published in the Nature journal found that about 28% of tested non-antibiotic medications can disrupt gut microbiota and promote the growth of harmful pathogens like salmonella. This effect may increase infection risk, particularly in older or medically vulnerable individuals. Common drugs include some statins, antidepressants, antihistamines, antacids, and chemotherapy agents. were shown to inhibit beneficial gut bacteria while leaving harmful microbes unaffected. This imbalance can weaken the gut's natural defenses and allow pathogens to gain an advantage. Experts stress that patients should not stop necessary medications, but the findings highlight the importance of monitoring gut health. Targeted use of probiotics or prebiotics may help mitigate risks, though more human-based research is needed. Troy, can you kind of break that down for us, the use of probiotics and prebiotics and how that can help our gut health, especially if someone is on some of these medications that might be inhibiting their beneficial gut bacteria?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things when you talk about probiotics or prebiotics that we always knew we were supposed to take if you took an antibiotic. Because what happens is when you take that antibiotic, it's going to kill everything in its wake. It's basically the nuclear bomb for your gut. So it's whatever's standing, it's going to take out. But in this case, what we didn't know is that there were a lot of non-antibiotic drugs that also disrupt the gut health. So anytime you take a medication now, particularly the ones that we just mentioned, the statins, the antidepressants, the antihistamines, the antacids, all of those are having an effect on our gut. And they seem to be, based on this study, killing some of the beneficial or bacteria in our gut and then also allowing the non-beneficial bacteria to live and to thrive in that area, which is why you want a probiotic. So a probiotic or a prebiotic is something that you ingest, and then it's just going to help colonize and get more healthy bacteria in that area, allowing more of it to get into your gut and hopefully replicate and then give you better gut health down the road. So it's an interesting thing because I think I would say probably 95 to 99% of people in the medical community understand that antibiotics probably need to go along with some kind of probiotic or prebiotic. But this is new information that I think is very interesting and may explain why some people have gut issues when they're taking these products because we had no idea that it was really affecting the gut as a whole.
And are there certain foods that we can eat that kind of help feed that healthy bacteria and serve as prebiotics or probiotics?
Yeah, I mean, there are always, yogurt is one that always has, typically has some probiotics to it. Now, have to be careful with some of the yogurts because they may have sugar in it, which will also increase the growth of those things that you don't want in your gut. And then things like anything that is like kimchi or sauerkraut and things like that, we know have some beneficial pieces for the gut as well, especially when you're talking about probiotics and prebiotics. Apple cider vinegar is another one that seems to have a lot of good health benefits for the gut as well. So those are things that you can take to kind of help supplement if you're taking any of those medications.
It's really good. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah. So our next headline is common ADHD drug linked to obesity risks. Experts say benefits likely outweigh the risks. So this was a study that was done in South Korea, and they found that children who had ADHD and they were treated with Ritalin or methylphenidate had higher rates of overweight and obesity compared with their peers who did not have ADHD. Severe obesity was actually twice as common among children who were on extended Ritalin therapy, meaning they kept on it much longer. We know that long-term Ritalin use was also linked to slightly shorter adult height, though the differences were small and they weren't sure that it was totally clinically significant, but something to think about that it can affect height. And they suggest that appetite suppression and possible effects on the growth hormone during sleep may play a role, which is interesting that one of the side effects of methylphenidate is appetite suppression, but now they have linked it to obesity, which typically you don't think go hand in hand, but that's where those hormones really getting messed up starts to affect our bodies in a negative way. So obviously, this study has some limitations to it. They didn't actually measure the lifestyle or genetic factors, so they can't prove causation with it. But it is at least a step for us to go, okay, here are some things that we're seeing with ADHD medications, and maybe it just gives us a little bit more caution as parents before we go ahead and put our kids on something like that. And hopefully, it allows us to go, what are some other things we can do to maybe overcome the ADHD scenario that our kids are having and not just reflexively go towards some medication?
Yeah, I would be very interested to look at the data around Ritalin use or other ADHD medications that have been linked to this and to childhood obesity and the childhood obesity numbers in our country, because obviously we know those are two very big problems that we have in the United States, childhood obesity and overprescribing of ADHD medications for kids. So as you said, there's this study doesn't show causation, but definitely it would be cool to see or interesting to see if we could find any type of correlation in the United States, since we know that both of those things are big problems for our children's health here in the US.
For sure. I think it's a good first step.
Well, thanks so much for sharing all of these insights, Troy. I think this has been super helpful when it comes to conversations around sleep, around gut health, around ADHD medications, and all things health and wellness. So thank you so much for sharing, and appreciate you taking the time to be on.
Absolutely. Always enjoy it.
Well, thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Frontline Health Podcast by Centurion Health. As always, we want to encourage you, take what you've learned today, go out and take ownership of your health, because you are your best health advocate. We'll see you next time on the Frontline Health Podcast.
If you enjoyed what you heard today on the podcast, please consider subscribing and leaving us a review. We would love to hear your comments or questions about anything we've talked about on the show. For more health news, tips, and insights, follow us at Centurion Health on Instagram, Facebook, X, and YouTube. And for safe, effective, and affordable healthcare products made in the USA to help you elevate your health and life, visit centurion.health. We look forward to you joining us next time on the Frontline Health Podcast by Centurion.